What's going on YouTube? It's Teach back again with another video, and today I'm giving you a reason for optimism for all NFC teams. We already did the AFC side. Be sure to go back and check out that video. But today we're talking optimism for the 16 NFC teams. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you do, be sure to hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you're new around here, want to see more football content as we get closer and closer to the regular season, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And of course, this is just a catalyst for a conversation. Tell me what you think about these reasons for optimism down below in the comment section. Where was I right? Where was I wrong? Was your favorite team in this video? Tell me why you're optimistic about their chances next season. And curtailing that into my next point, and then we'll jump into this. Reasons for optimism, there's a lot of them. I didn't want to rely too much on draft picks or draft classes in general, but there are a couple of those here. You can already see one on your screen now. But also, a successful season is something that varies team by team. For a team like the Commanders, maybe it's getting back to the playoffs, and for a team like Dallas, it could be winning the Super Bowl, right? So a successful season, every team's trying to win the Super Bowl, but realistically, that's not always in play for everybody. But that being said, everyone has a different goal in mind and an achievement that they think they can hit and a step forward they can take. And I'm trying to give you the reason for optimism why they might be able to take that step forward. For the Dallas Cowboys, as we kick things off, CeeDee Lamb, right? If you were to put together a list of young wide receivers who aren't already the number one, and maybe CeeDee Lamb in your eyes already was, but especially with no Amari Cooper, there's no doubt about who is the one in Dallas. But if you were to make a list of young wide receivers who could potentially replace someone like an Amari Cooper, a solidified number one wide receiver on their team that had to be moved on from because of the cap space handlings of the front office, CeeDee Lamb would be towards the top of the list, if not number one, right? Because Justin Jefferson, a lot of people's eyes, is already the number one in Minnesota. So CeeDee Lamb makes a ton of sense. And if you're going to replace an Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb is exactly the guy who can step in as the number one wide receiver, absorb the volume, and he can play both inside and out. So I think there's a lot of matchups you can kind of manipulate and exploit if you're Kellen Moore, Mike McCarthy, and that offense as a whole. So CeeDee Lamb got to be the reason for optimism and try to keep that Dallas offense to where it was pre-calf injury for Dak Prescott last season. For the Giants, I'm again not trying to rely too much on draft classes, but man, that first round is special, right? When you're picking 5 and 7, you want to hit a couple home runs, and you want them to be both best player available, but if they can fit a position of need, that's a slam dunk. And I think that's exactly what the Giants did, right? They got, in some people's eyes, the number one tackle in the class. He was my number 2, and he's going to fill in perfectly on the right side. And he's played right tackle before, so it makes a ton of sense. Kayvon Thibodeau, for some people, as high as the number 1 overall player in this draft class. For some people, he's the number 1 edge. I didn't have him that high. He was number 2 behind Hutchinson for me. But that being said, he totally warranted a top 7 pick. He's an elite talent and, again, a position of need. And, honorable mention here, I'll do this for some of these teams. Brian Dable, Joe Shane. Those are a couple other names for a reason for optimism, right? New direction as a head coach, new organizational direction with a new GM coming in as well. So hopefully that leads this team in a better path forward and eventually maybe get back into Super Bowl contention. But Neal and Thibodeau, I think, play a huge part in that as well. And then for the Eagles, you make the trade for A.J. Brown, and now you got him and Devonta Smith. I cannot wait to see what this Eagles offense looks like. I'm not even an Eagles fan, but that's a wide receiver duo that could get even more out of Jalen Hurts. And kind of year over year, I've been higher on Hurts than most. And year over year, every time I see him get that much better. I think that's a big reason why I have enjoyed watching him grow. From Alabama to Oklahoma, he got better. Oklahoma to the 4 games we saw as a rookie, he got better. 4 games as a rookie to last year, he improved. And you put a legit number 1 X wide receiver opposite of Devonta Smith, and especially considering some of the concerns people had with Devonta Smith coming into the draft, more than a year ago now. Oh, he's a little light, doesn't handle press well because of that. Well, now you can just play him as a legit, unbelievable Z, not have him on the line of scrimmage, and you can do a ton of different stuff with him. And I think their skill sets play well off of each other. They're both excellent route runners. They can get open and make it easy for Jalen Hurts. And A.J. Brown is an animal in the Yak game. Ask the Baltimore Ravens. They're still trying to tackle him now and keep him out of the end zone. So a huge addition to that team. And now you have a legit 1A, 1B pairing. I always saw Devonta Smith as a guy who could be a number 1. Now they got 2 1s in my eyes. So that's what you need to do. That's kind of the blueprint for today's era. And where Jalen Hurts may not be as talented of a thrower of the football as Patrick Mahomes, putting some elite weapons around him might get him closer and, kind of alleviate some of the gap between a Mahomes and a Hurts. And now, again, I'm not saying Hurts is going to take that type of elite, but I think that wide receiver duo is a huge reason for optimism. And for the Commanders, it's another duo, and they're on your screen here. Montez Sweat, Chase Young. Young, assuming he comes back healthy and 100%. That's as good a pass rush duo as there is in the league. And And Montez Sweat might not be the guy you could really consider that duo to be with. Maybe it's Chase Young and Jonathan Allen, who's emerged as one of the best defensive tackles in football. You'll still have Deron Payne there. He's more of a true nose, but I digress. That front four, unbelievable, and they can all get to the quarterback at some varying degrees of success. So that pass rush could be a huge reason why the Commanders are a sneaky team and maybe a dark horse to get in the playoffs and maybe a dangerous team once they get into the postseason, especially considering they were there 2 years ago and had Taylor Heineke. Keep it kind of close with Tampa Bay. So Carson Wentz has more talent in his body than Taylor Heineke does. That's not disrespecting Taylor Heineke in his name, but Wentz has more natural talent. There's some flaws there, but he has natural ability more than Heineke has at his disposal. So that, plus hopefully a little bit better of an offense in turn, the pass rush is what makes this team potentially scary. And like you look at the roster for Washington, where they can be elite and better than any other team in the league is with their front four. So, of course, the pass rush has to be a huge reason for optimism, and it can create turnovers, which puts the ball in the hands of your offense that much more. And maybe if your offense isn't great, that's exactly what you need. Take away the ball from the other team, put it back in your hands of your offense, and have more stabs at it. Just breaking down the game to a third grade level there. Moving on to the NFC South, I'm fascinated. I got to see what this Falcons wide receiver room, how it plays out. What's the rotation? I have got to see what they do. And honestly, if Arthur Smith does not take advantage of the fact that he has a 6'4 Drake London, a 6'5 Kyle Pitts, a 6'4 whatever Auden Tate, maybe he shouldn't keep his job. Because there's just not another wide receiver room across the entire league that is filled with monsters, quite frankly. Those guys are built out of a lab, athletic freaks when it comes to their stature. Kyle Pitts has a little bit more, speed and athletic ability that maybe, Drake London doesn't have, but nonetheless, they have a skill set that not many possess, and there's three of them in that same room. How does that offense take advantage of that skill set and those abilities those guys bring to the table? So I think this team, especially with Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, who you don't look at and say elite quarterback, unknowns, we'll see, especially Ridder. But that being said, those type of big catch radius, red zone monsters, throw it up, they'll come down with it. Guys with that type of skill set maybe make up for where your quarterback isn't elite and maybe there's some deficiencies with their accuracy or whatever the case may be. So maybe maybe that's the philosophy that they've had with drafting. A Drake London, bringing in an Auden Tate. It was like, hey, we're just going to have freaking monsters on the outside and we're going to push corners around and it's just going to be, hey, Marcus Mariota, throw it to his back shoulder somewhere. He'll get it. He's got a big enough catch radius. He'll get his hands on the football. Just kind of throw it in that general area. So I'm fascinated. I've got to see what this looks like. But, there's a lot of things to be excited for the Falcons, despite it being one of the weaker rosters in the NFL in my eyes. But it's a team that's in the middle of a rebuild. But the cornerstone of it, in my eyes, is that wide receiver room and how much size they have. For the Carolina Panthers, Ikem Ekwonu, your 6th overall pick, you take him in the first round. Does that complete your offensive line? That plus the signing of Austin Corbett. I think the reason I'm optimistic about it, and even though I'm not, super setting my bar and my expectations super high for Carolina, is okay, if you fix that offensive line, let's say Ikem Ekwonu is your franchise left tackle, he steps in, he's an immediate upgrade over who was playing there last year. Still have Brady Christensen, maybe he kicks inside to play guard because his arms are a little shorter. You bring in Austin Corbett, you still have Taylor Moton. Bradley Bozeman's one of the better values from free agency, 1 year, $2.5 million deal. Maybe that offensive line's complete. Now, Bozeman's a 1 year deal, but that being said, if Ikem Ekwonu hits, and obviously multi-year extension and Austin Corbett plays at a high level, you're feeling pretty good about the future of that offensive line, which I think is a huge reason for optimism because even beyond the season, if Matt Corral maybe doesn't look good or they have to trot out Sam Darnold for half the year or whatever the case may be, if the quarterback play isn't great, you at least know whatever is on the horizon and in the future plans of the organization and whoever may be making that decision, because it might not be Matt Rule and company, you feel confident that there's going to be a stable enough offensive line in front of maybe a rookie quarterback that you're taking to the top of the first round next year, or a veteran that you just gave up a ton of assets for, so you're down a first round pick and you can't go draft a top tier offensive lineman. That quarterback's just going to have to live. So I think by building up that offensive line, and it makes me feel that much more confident and assured with the direction that they went with that first overall pick, that no matter what the future of the quarterback position looks like, there should be a solid offensive line in front of them to help kind of ease that transition, whether it's a veteran quarterback making their way to Carolina or it's someone that the Panthers draft at the top of the first round next year, which in either situation, having a good offensive line in front of them with, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson still in the building goes a long way. For the New Orleans Saints, Dennis Allen's still in the building. There's a lot of things to be excited about. Chris Olave, I think, is a good one. Tyrann Mathieu coming back, home. And Jarvis Landry, same thing. But Jameis Winston, I'm not the first to say it. This has been kind of a hot talk point I've heard it 1,000 times. And, NFL pundits that I listen to and watch. But Jameis Winston, when we got to see him last year, was being pretty clinical with the football, avoiding turnovers. But he still has the arm strength, the accuracy. There's so much talent inside the body of Jameis Winston. It just came down to his decision-making. And if Pete Carmichael, the new offensive coordinator and play caller for the Saints, can kind of keep him in reins, keep him in check, and Michael Thomas is back, hopefully healthy playing the entire year. Chris Olave was your 11th overall pick, first-round selection this year. You signed a Jarvis Landry to play in the slot. There's some weapons to play with there for Jameis. There's tools at his disposal. And if he's not turning the football over, but you're still maybe getting the guy who can throw for around 5,000 yards, can easily throw for 30 touchdowns, okay, that offense might be hot. And that defense is going to be legit, especially with Dennis Allen still in the building. So if Jameis can do what he did last year, but on a 17-game sample, and there's going to be some stinkers. Jameis is going to have a couple of 4-pick games or whatever next year. 3-pick games, whatever you want to classify. But that being said, if the sum of those 17 games is pretty much what we saw last year from Jameis, this team could easily be in the playoffs. So that's your reason for optimism if you're a Saints fan. And a big reason why, I was fading New Orleans hard last year. But I'm kind of starting to get back on a hype train for what that roster looks like, especially if they can all stay healthy. For the Bucs, I used it with a couple of teams in my AFC video, so I'm sorry this is a bit of a cop-out, but this is such a balanced roster. And I had to put these guys in the picture here. Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting. That corner room in and of itself encapsulates what Tampa has been able to do, and a ton of credit to Jason Light, the general manager. He has been able to, whenever there's a hole, fill it soundly, whether it's a solid contract or free agent signing, or it's drafting Tristan Wirfs at 14, where it's like, dude, how did you get that? He's kind of like Brandon Beane, where every move he makes is so smart that I'm just like, yep, that makes sense, that checks up, that makes it. I see why he did that. Adds up in my head. But he doesn't reach. He's not paying a Christian Kirk when he needs a receiver $18 million a year, right? He'll go out there and sign Russell Gage instead for 10. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at here, while I'm not, saying it all the right ways. But they have such a balanced roster. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the league still, the greatest and most accomplished quarterback of all time in my eyes, and Tom Brady. As long as they're healthy, this roster, starting 11 on both sides of the football, is as good as it gets, maybe the best roster in football. Now, that being said, I talked about the Bills in the AFC video, best roster in my eyes, them or Tampa. And at this time last year, I would have told you, yeah, Tampa Bay probably is the best roster in football. They didn't win the Super Bowl this past season. So having the best roster and winning a Super Bowl don't always correlate, but damn, does it make the job a whole lot easier. So moving on, NFC West time, AFC and NFC West, in most people's opinions, the best divisions in football. So for the Cardinals, I'm going to say pass catchers. And, when I did my early predictions for the NFC West, I kind of talked about some of my hesitation, and part of that is the 6-game suspension for Deandre Hopkins, but we know the chemistry has been clear and evident. Even when Hopkins has missed games, when he's out in the field, him and Kyler get along great, and they have been an awesome duo to watch. And then I had to include this picture. College teammates, Kyler Murray and Hollywood Brown, reunited. We saw what they did at the college level, doing it at the NFL. The game is a different note, but we've seen Kyler be good. We've seen Hollywood Brown make big plays. Who's to say they can't do it with one another when, again, they have great chemistry? And really, the strength of this team will be Week 7 onward. When DeAndre Hopkins is out there and he can be your X, he can be the guy who's absorbing press at the line of scrimmage and beating it, and then you can move Hollywood into that Z role or playing from the slot if you want to do something creative and interesting there. There's options. And when you have, it'd be really the first time that we've really seen with Arizona where they have two legitimate starting wide receivers on the outside. Christian Kirk, when he moved to the slot last year, had some moments. He had some big games, but it wasn't consistently there. I think this could be the year where, especially if maybe Hollywood's playing on the outside, him, DeAndre Hopkins, could be a duo that Kyler Murray hasn't had yet, and it could be really special, especially if Kyler Murray's playing like the MVP version of himself that we got at the beginning of last year. And then plus, bring back Zach Ertz, Zach Williams is back, and then you draft Trey McBride with your first pick, the second round of this year's draft. They're loading up in the tight end room, so interested to see what all that means. I'm not crazy about all the investments in the tight end position, but nonetheless, there's really not a lot of excuses for there not being talent potentially at Kyler Murray's disposal, right? So I think that was the focus, and I think that makes sense when you just put it in that lens. So this is the year. Kyler Murray, you've got your pass catchers, go make it happen. For the Rams, It's not quite the exact same roster, right? No Andrew Whitworth, but Joseph Noteboom came up and played really great football and on some huge stages, which I've reiterated multiple times, including in the playoffs against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And sure, no Von Miller, but still have Leonard Floyd, still have Aaron Donald. Greg Gaines was a huge contributor from that, nose tackle, D tackle spot last season. And you add Bobby Wagner, so where you lose some star power as an edge rusher, you gain it at a position you haven't really had any star power at during Sean McVay's tenure at that inside linebacker spot. So fascinated by that. And you have a superstar basically all three levels, if you want to still call Bobby Wagner a superstar. Aaron Donald on the D-line, Wagner the linebacker spot, and then Jalen Ramsey in the secondary. Fascinating, relying on star power, but couple of tweaks, couple changes. But this roster is pretty much the same. And, the coaching staff, pretty much the same. So no Kevin O'Connell, but Sean McVay is kind of the archetype of the offense anyways, and Zach Robinson gets moved up. So I don't anticipate a whole lot of turnover there despite losing O'Connell, but the roster is nearly identical. The organizational shape and the faces in that building, the key decision makers, are pretty much the same. So who's to say this team can't run it back, especially with the NFC being a little bit more open than the AFC. And for the 49ers, so still Jimmy Garoppolo on the roster at the time of this recording. We'll see, but I just have a hard time thinking, even if they keep Jimmy G, you can't move heaven and earth to get Trey Lance and then not start him in year two. That's just where I stand right now. And even if you're hesitant as a 49ers fan saying Trey Lance is, they haven't, kind of given that assured, Jimmy's still in the roster, but that's because we want to trade him for the value that we think he should go for. They haven't said that. And they haven't been no, Trey's our guy. They haven't gotten that boost of confidence. And I can understand where if you're a 49ers fan, that's kind of concerning. But just take a step back and be that mobility is something that Kyle Shanahan's never really been able to work with outside of, Robert Griffin III. And we saw how that worked for a year. Arm strength that Jimmy Garoppolo just doesn't have. And those two things that can't be taught, their natural God-given abilities, is something that should give you optimism, right? Now, do they need to be refined? Do they need to learn how they fit within the Shanahan offense and how to use that big arm and, get the big play elements out of a Brandon Ayuk or whoever on the outside? Yes, I understand. There's more complexity to that, but Lance's potential with that offense is a huge reason for optimism. And he's had a year to sit, so, ideally, the game's not moving too fast for him. He's comfortable calling plays. He feels solid in the huddle. He can make checks at the line of scrimmage. All those things that you need a quarterback to be able to do. He should be able to do it. And that should be a huge reason for optimism, given his God-given talent and ability, plus a year in the system, a year at the NFL level to watch, learn, and kind of soak it all in. So that's got to be a reason for optimism. Maybe not number one, but it's my number one for the 49ers. And the Seattle Seahawks, this is the draft class shout out here, but this is a team that I think should embrace being one of the weaker teams in the NFL. And, taking a step back sometimes is exactly what you need to be able to take a huge leap forward. And I think in 2 years' time, Seattle, if they, have sound off seasons, which I think their draft last year was a good start. If they put together one more good off season and maybe one more thereafter, this team could be right back into it. That's why I'm saying they should extend DK Metcalf, because I think a 2-year turnaround is realistic for this team. But starts with Charles Cross at 9 overall. That's your Dwayne Brown replacement. Awesome. He was my OT1, so obviously I think the world of him. And even if it's Abraham Lucas, who a bit of a project, but played right tackle at Washington, you keep him in state, he could be a plug-and-play Brendan Shell replacement. Maybe that's Stone Forsythe, who's going into year 2, but you have options. And nonetheless, whoever isn't starting at right tackle is going to be a solid and cheap swing tackle at that. Kenneth Walker, especially if there's no Chris Carson. He's going to have a workload cut out for him. Even if they still believe in Rashad Penny. The two of them and a Pete Carroll run-heavy offense, they're going to both see the field a ton. So I think this draft class was kind of a step in the right direction. I've only listed off a few of those names, but you kind of get the image here. They're building towards something, and I think that first draft, that 2022 draft, could be what we look back at, and it may not be the same thing as the draft with Bobby Wagner and Russell Wilson, and we look at that draft and it's like, wow, that was the birth of that Legion of Boom era for Seattle. I'm not going to say 2022 is going to be the exact same thing, but man, if this wasn't a good step in the right direction, if this wasn't the right foot to get started on in this rebuild process, I think you'd be hard to dissuade me away from that. I think the Seahawks did exactly what they needed to do, recognized where this roster's at, took good football players, didn't rush the quarterback decision. Let's build the foundation. We'll figure out quarterback presumably at the top of the first round next year. So this draft class, I think, is a huge reason for optimism for Seattle fans to go see those young guys out on the field and kind of be the beginning of a new era for Seattle. at all. And on now to the NFC North. Chicago Bears, I could have gone a secondary route. You draft, a Kyler Gordon, you bring in a Jaquan Brisker. I think, Brisker paired with Eddie Jackson, Fuller paired with Jalen Johnson. There's some pieces there, and 3 of the 4 of them, basically, everybody not named Eddie Jackson, young pieces that could be a part of a long-term future in Chicago. And then Eddie Jackson's kind of the star that's been there, and maybe the guy who mentors all those guys how to be pros. The secondary was definitely worth, the honorable mention here, but when you talk about Chicago fans and, some of their frustrations, just go check out Bears Twitter last year. What were they tweeting about for the majority of the year? Matt Nagy doesn't know what he's doing. Ryan Pace needs to be fired as GM. Like, that was some of the immediate things that come to mind with what Bears fans were complaining about. And congratulations, you got your wish. And Matt Eberflus may not be the offensive guru that you're looking at, but Luke Getsy, I'm really intrigued by. Quarterbacks coach, actually had a head coaching interview this year with Denver. He's now your offensive coordinator, working with Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully some of that can rub off on Justin Fields, and that system can kind of translate to what Chicago's trying to build. It would help if they had better wide receivers, but I digress. But Eberflus worked wonders with that Indianapolis defense, and especially in areas where you look at and you're like, you need to be talented on the outside. Well, Eberflus made do with, subpar cornerback talent, and they were always trying to find that, elite edge rusher, never quite got there, so he was able to work and have a top-tier defense despite that. So really interested to see what he can do with this team that, if they hold on to Robert Quinn, a guy who's coming off a, 18-sack season, that's intriguing. And then plus, again, building up that secondary and the safety tandem plus their cornerback tandem, this might be one of the best secondaries that Matt Eberflus has gotten to work with. Now, obviously, that's potential. We'll see what, Fuller and Brisker kind of develop into, but only time will tell that story. But, you bring in Matt Eberflus, and sometimes it's also just having a new person at the front of the room and leading a group of men. Sometimes that's exactly what you need to kind of reinvigorate the hopes inside a locker room. And ideally, if you're a Bears fan, Matt Eberflus brings that to the table. And then, Ryan Poles, new direction in the GM spot. So obviously that has a ton of implications on where this team will go in the future. So you don't know where that's going to be because, again, only time will tell. But that's exciting, right? It's not Matt Nagy and it's not Ryan Pace. It's a different Matt and Ryan combo at head coach and GM respectively. So I think that's a huge reason for optimism. The talent on the roster may not be all that great. Also, year 2 Justin Fields, should be excited about that. But I think Eberflus polls kind of steal it for me when talking about Chicago. For the Lions, young talent. And I have Jeff Okudah here. I'm really hoping he could bounce back from that Achilles injury because the talent's there. And as a draft prospect, there was really nothing holding him back. And there's a reason he went number 3 overall. So I'm just hoping that kind of all comes together. But Amani Oruwariye, 6 picks last year. Really nice, developmental piece there. He's a 5th-round pick coming out of Penn State. Efetu Melifonwu, while we're sticking to the secondary. Obviously, somebody they took in the 3rd round last year. They have high hopes, and we'll see what he can kind of develop into because he was a raw prospect coming out of Syracuse. But Aiden Hutchinson, both Aquara brothers. Josh Pascal, you also drafted this year, coming out of Kentucky. A lot of talent across the defensive line, but even some of the guys who drafted in last year's draft, Levi Onwuzurike, Liam McNeil, feel like a really nice defensive tackle pairing for the future. Then on the offensive side, you draft Jamison Williams. Whenever he's on the field, there is going to be a ton of attention paid to him, not only as me as a viewer, but the defense because of that speed. DeAndre Swift is still young. Jamal Williams is a player I've always liked. Amon-Ra St. Brown going into year 2. I can go on and on. Bené Sewell, etc., etc., etc. There is so much young talent on this team, and so many of them have already made an impact. And then, talk about a Jamison Williams and Aiden Hutchinson. The bar and expectations are set high, despite, they're rookies and they're unknown commodities. Number 2 overall pick, you trade up and draft a receiver at 12. You're expecting a lot of those guys, and that's going to be the expectation for Detroit. So with that much young talent, this is as exciting as time as there have been for a while for Detroit fans. And I totally get why there's so many Lions fans getting amped up heading into the season because finally you're not going to be completely the laughingstock. Sure, might not win a Super Bowl this year. You're probably not going to win a Super Bowl this year with Jared Goff. But that being said, there's so much that is beginning to come together. And, part of that is also year 2 of, Dan Campbell is the head coach. You just watched your second offseason with Brad Holmes as the GM. He's done a great job kind of putting this roster all together. And now we get to kind of see it all come to fruition, all come together. And the way it looks on paper is it looks like this team's about to be a quarterback away. There's still some holes to kind of figure out, but you let them get some run time under their belt. A lot of young players need to see the field. They need to get some NFL experience. And a good setup, year 3 with Campbell and Holmes, respectively. They draft that quarterback or get that quarterback however you think they should. And, one more offseason of bring in some free agents, another draft class to kind of fill in those holes as well and add some young talent, young cheap talent at that. And man, this team could be really special heading into next season, 2023, 2024. But, we're still a ways from that. But if you're a Lions fan, obviously the young talent on the roster has got to be what's making you excited for Sundays once we get there in the NFL season. For the Packers, I mean, you have a 2-time MVP winner consecutively at quarterback. Aaron Rodgers is a huge reason for optimism. And also, I want to say 3-time overall MVP winner. I do know that, but he's won it back-to-back times. But I think that secondary in specific, and this could be as good a defense as Rodgers ever had. That 2010 Super Bowl team, and then this defense kind of immediately stand out as the best that Green Bay's been able to complement Rodgers with. Now, granted, they don't catch passes, and that's kind of a big concern for Green Bay as well. But we won't talk about that today. That defense could be special, but I think it's the secondary in specific, right? Like Rashawn Gary's an emerging superstar potentially at edge, and Preston Smith's had some big years, and Devontae Wyatt, I'm excited to see what he can do opposite or playing alongside Kenny Clark as interior pass rush. But dude, Jair Alexander, one of the best cornerbacks in football. Eric Stokes, who was way more impressive, especially as a rookie, than I would have anticipated. You got a lot of good play and great moments from Rasul Douglas. Obviously, the pick against Arizona, kind of what immediately comes to mind. That secondary in the cornerback room in specific is looking pretty darn good. And then Darnell Savage, Adrian Amos, the guys in this picture, that might be the best safety duo, right there with maybe the Bills and Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde. I mean, it's up there. Maybe the Ravens too. We'll see what Kyle Hamilton develops as playing with Marcus Williams. But Amos and Savage, nonetheless, one of the best safety tandems in the NFL. That plus that cornerback room headlined by a top 3 corner who's still young in his mid-20s, Jair Alexander. Yeah, that secondary is crazy. And I think the defense is really good, but that secondary could be a huge reason why they win games. And, maybe especially early on, a couple extra turnovers, a couple more reps for Rodgers to kind of figure out that wide receiver room and who's going to be his go-to guy. I'm kind of joking when I say that, but I think that defense, specifically the secondary, is a huge reason for optimism for Green Bay. And then the last team we'll talk about, the Vikings, that offensive firepower. One, can we talk about how tough that picture of Justin Jefferson is? My God, wear a visor week in and week out, please. But Jefferson, Thielen, even KJ Osborne as a 3, I think that's pretty solid. Dalvin Cook, if he's healthy, one of the best running backs in football. And Kirk Cousins, God bless him for his fault, but he's been able to be a productive quarterback in the NFL. And he's put up some gaudy numbers, including last year. His stats last year are crazy. And now you have Kevin O'Connell and that offensive system coming from LA. Look out. There could be, no doubt, fireworks in the future for Minnesota. And I also think there's something to be said about, anytime it was 3rd and long, or anytime that, Mike Zimmer and Kubiak as the offensive coordinator last year could play conservative, they did. 3rd and 10, let's just dump it off. 3rd and 10, let's go to withdrawal. It felt like they were kind of half trusting Kirk Cousins. I think Kevin O'Connell said in the building, hey, dude, if you're the first quarterback I get as a head coach, that's pretty good. There's a lot of first-time head coaches that are working with way worse. So let's go out there and chuck it. And it could be something similar to how McVay and Stafford kind of worked last year, where during the regular season, sure, he's a good quarterback. Let him take shots. He'll make bad plays, and he might lead the league in interceptions like Stafford did. And then we'll kind of buckle it down once we get in the postseason, which is kind of exactly what happened for the Rams. Now, Vikings fans, I'm not promising you the Super Bowl here, but I think that offensive firepower on top of that system coming from LA with Kevin O'Connell as your new head coach, that is something to be excited about. And of course, Justin Jefferson, pay that man whenever he asks for the contract. He is, him and Jamar Chase, the future of the wide receiver position in my eyes. So that is going to do it for my NFC reasons for optimism. And I also want to let you know we are going to do a reason for some doubt heading into next season for all 32 teams. But that's going to do it for today's video. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. And if you did, be sure to hit that like button and help me out a ton. If you're new around here, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button and join for a conversation down below. Where do you think I was right? Where do you think I was wrong? Who's your favorite team? Did I talk about them in today's video? And what makes you optimistic about their chances next year, about taking that next step forward as a franchise? Love to have your thoughts down below, and I respond to just about every comment. So let's talk some football down in the comment section. That's going to do it for me. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.